What is the definition of a true American running for president? Would he or she be a conservative or perhaps a progressive? Ideally, they would have some qualities from both. Both parties have what is referred to as second-tier candidates. More often than not, these candidates who are not the chosen ones make the most sense. In a poll after the last Republican debate, CNN online voters gave Texas Congressman Ron Paul an overwhelming and surprising victory. Some question if Paul is a conservative or a plain-talking maverick who likes to speak the truth, no matter what the consequences. He is turning heads. Mainstream media, for the most part, continues to ignore Ron Paul, but we're not mainstream media. So today, an INN exclusive interview with Congressman Ron Paul. Welcome to INN, Congressman.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
One of your points is that real conservatives have always supported low taxes and low spending. You complain that U.S. economy and our very independence as a nation is increasingly in the hands of foreign governments such as China and Saudi Arabia because their central banks and also finance our runaway spending. Another candidate who's running for president said the Bush administration has forced the American people to borrow money just to pay for the massive tax cuts for those earning, on average, more than $1.25 million a year. How would you possibly resolve this?
Conservatives have been in charge here these last 6 years for sure, and to a large degree even since 1994. And they've always preached, balanced budgets and limited government, but we've gotten exactly the opposite. We're living way beyond our means. We're passing on all the problems and all the debt to a younger generation. And in order to tide ourselves over, we have a pretty good scheme going for us. We get to print the world currency, which is the dollar. They still accept the dollar, even though less so every single day, right? Right. Currently, there is an attack on the dollar, and interest rates are rising. But we spend too much every place, whether it's policing inside our borders or outside our borders. Just think of what they do with the drug war and the Patriot Act, and of course, there's so much economic intervention. They spend a lot of money there. But then overseas is where the big bucks are spent. And it's spent for very special reasons because corporations end up controlling the government. And I'm a free enterpriser, so I'm not annoyed by people making profits, but I'm very annoyed when corporations get control of the government, get the contracts, part of the military-industrial complex, the Halliburtons of the world. These are the kind of things that I think will destroy our country and actually is really hurting our young people more than anybody because they suffer the most from the economic consequences. They lose their jobs first. They have the inflation. They have a harder time making it and paying their bills.
Congressman Paul, economic Darwinism really causes the lack of a level playing field. Big corporations don't play fair. We saw that first with Enron, and many others soon followed. Some have the resources of small countries with fewer regulatory laws. What will stop them from trampling on the rights of American citizens, as we have already seen?
Even in a free market, the government has a very important role to play. I mean, the government is there to protect private property rights, enforce contracts, and make sure that nobody gets special deals. Instead, what we have, and I think free markets get a bum rap because if you have a corporation that's making money off war profits. That's a lot different than if Bill Gates is providing you a good price for a computer or some company is able to make your cell phone available to you. So there's a big difference. But unfortunately, what happens if we once allow our government to start getting involved in our personal lives and our economic lives, all of a sudden the special interests take over. Like everybody wants to help people get medical care. I do as a physician. I don't think anybody's against it. It's just on how we do it. So 30, 40 years ago, the government got involved in doing it. Who runs it now? The HMOs, the PPOs, the drug companies, they make a lot of profits. The patients get poorer care, and the doctors are so upset they don't even want to participate anymore. But it's the abuse of government and the cooperation or the collusion between government and big business that I think really messes it up.
Congressman Paul, you say on your website NAFTA superhighway is just one part of a plan to erase the borders between the U.S. and Mexico, called the North American Union. This spawn of powerful special interests would create a single nation out of Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, with an unelected bureaucracy and money system. My question is, who are these special interests, and how do you propose to stop them?
the real movement started in April of 2005 when the three presidents, Mexico, United States, and Canada, got together and had this pseudo-agreement because it has no legality to it. It wasn't approved by the Congress, and that was the Security and Prosperity Partnership. And now, even in this new bill that's being proposed, the immigration bill has even details in there that further moves us along to a North American Union. Once again, I think the people who suffer the most are the poor. Just think of who rebelled in Mexico when we had NAFTA. It was the very poor that complained the most and rebelled. I think it's the large corporations, the international banks, and they control things, and they do it in the name of freedom and capitalism and free trade, but I think it's all a collusion for managed trade and control.
We've become less of a nation of mortars and more a nation that uses our military to protect U.S. and multinational interests abroad. Forget about right or wrong. How do these things coexist without what you brought up in the debate in South Carolina, blowback? It seems to be economic blow. The economic adventures cause just about as much blowback as the military adventures.
Yes, and that's what the American people, I think, have failed to realize, because this concept has been around for a long time. It wasn't like I invented this term or this notion. It's been here a long time. People have written about it, and we should expect it to happen. You know, I use 1953 as a really bad start for us in moving in that direction. Iran, which had a lot of tendencies for democracy, had an elected president, Mossadegh, and yet he wanted to take the oil controls away from the British and the United States. So we went in there and overthrew his government, and we gave him 25 years of the Shah, who was a very militant dictator, and they hated him, and they finally got rid of him. But what it did, it produced a radical Islam. That was part of the reason that radical Islam came in and took over and took our hostages. And that, to me, is blowback, an unintended consequence. And too often it's done in the name of peace and prosperity and democracy and making the world a better place to live. But there's usually a sinister motive behind where we send our troops. In the Middle East, I don't think anybody can deny that oil is a big issue. We're in Colombia, and there's oil in Colombia. We're now in Somalia once again, even though we're using a proxy army. That's in the Horn of Africa. It's key strategically, and it has oil too. Sudan is the same way. There's oil there. I think that is the motivation. We literally and unfortunately end up using our military, which is supposed to be used for our defense of our country, to use to go out and protect the interests of very, very powerful financial people.
How do you view business interests who convince local town governments to condemn properties that we've seen recently in Connecticut, New Jersey, for profit and the good of the community? Free market growth, to many of us, means the guys with the most money can run roughshod over individual property rights. How can less government protect the individual against what I call predator businesses?
Well, this is a twisting of what the responsibility of government should be. Instead of government using its power to take land from individuals and give it to special interests, the government should be there to protect property rights. And if you own property and you don't want to give it up, the government should be your protector, not the one that comes in and takes it from you. So we've allowed our government to act exactly opposite. The market is supposed to protect the property, protect private contracts, and protect the people, and yet it doesn't do that. It usually avoids doing all that. You know, for instance, the government is supposed to protect your privacy. But, you know, in these last few years, I don't think anybody feels, you know, safer and more secure with the Patriot Act and these other bills being passed. But one thing that you're supposed to have in a free society is open government. But now we have a government that's totally secret, and there's no privacy left for the people. So the government doesn't do what it's supposed to do and ignores the responsibility it's supposed to have.
The national ID card system, driver's licenses embedded with standard identifier data, and new tracking technologies. You, on your website, have called it Orwellian world of no privacy. For extra scare value, you could add in the radio frequency ID chips and that tracking technology. All these emerging technologies, however, fuel the new economy and are currently being implemented. How can this be reversed, and considering that these things are a new growing technology which is helping our economy?
If we're complacent and we allow the government to do it, it's going to happen. But, you know, in this area, there is a bit of rebellion going on at the state legislatures. You know, they are voting and they're saying they're not going to participate. That doesn't mean that we win the battle because a state votes and says we don't want to have our driver's license fulfill these same requirements and make it a national ID card. But ultimately, the people are the only ones who can stop it. As long as the people stay complacent and you know, whether it's the issue of war or invasion of our privacy or whatever, there's always ulterior motives. So much of this legislation that was passed immediately after 9/11 was not brand new proposals. They had been around for a long time. Like most of what was in the Patriot Act had been proposed. It's what they do is they wait for the opportunity when the people are scared and frightened. Well, we have to do this. And I'm sure you heard right after 9/11, well, it doesn't hurt to give up some of your freedoms if it makes us safe. How else can we be safe? But I think it's very important that you don't have to give up freedoms to be safe. Matter of fact, if you give up your freedoms, you're less safe.
Privacy protection is the centerpiece of your position. You say we must also protect medical privacy. Many of us agree. Big drug companies, hospital chains, and insurance companies are a very big lobby, and we have become the product. Our medical system is upside down. Michael Moore has a new film coming out about this in about a month. How could we possibly fix this?
It's really hard. Once government takes over the delivery of the medical care and the people become dependent on the government, it's almost impossible but that is the first step. And I think they're connected. Once you relinquish the responsibility of people taking care of themselves and the government does it, then the privacy is transferred. And that is a natural consequence because they will argue efficiency, you know, and it'll be better this way and it helps reduce costs and all these arguments. But what it does is help increase the profits. But a lot of well-intentioned things leads to invasion of privacy. Today we had a bill which I'm sure many people, even in your listening audience, might well agree with it. It was more federal restrictions on gun ownership because of that tragedy down in Virginia City. But what they want to do is have a national data bank of everybody's medical record, find out if there was any spousal abuse, find out if there was ever any medical problems. So all this medical history and all these things are putting into this huge data bank because if you want to apply for a gun ownership, they can call that up and find out. So some people would argue, well, this is good. We got to restrict guns kill and all that argument. At the same time, once you turn that responsibility over to the government, and then the government has to invade the privacy. So you sacrifice one liberty in order to try to, take care of another problem.
Presidential power. Unlimited presidential power. Many people have complained about this with the Bush administration. The Republicans have not held this administration accountable in any way, shape, or form. That's your party. People have talked about impeachment. H.R. 333, Dennis Kucinich's bill to impeach the vice president. Are you in favor of that bill? Are you in favor of holding Bush and Cheney accountable? And would you be a co-sponsor of H.R. 333? Would you even consider that?
Probably not right now, but I'm in favor of an investigation to find out who was explicitly responsible for lying and giving us the misinformation that led to the war. I mean, this is a serious, serious crime that was committed. And quite frankly, I think it was not just a mistake, not just misinformation. There were certain people who very, very deliberately wanted to distort the information. We now, fortunately, since the Democrats have been in charge, they have revealed this CIA information that was readily available before the war was started, which said, predicted all the things that some of us were saying anyway, that this would lead to a tragedy and a mess and chaos, and yet that was denied to most of the members of Congress. They never read this. But I think the responsibility falls on the opposition party. I think he's doing the smart thing of doing it at the vice president before the president, because if you get rid of the president, you end up with Cheney. I don't know whether you'd feel any better with that, because Cheney's the one that probably orchestrated this stuff. And if it's proven to be the case, whoever did it should be impeached.
Congressman Paul, we're going to give you the progressive litmus test. We'll try to keep the answers short and go through some ideas. And I'll just come up with some phrases, and you just kind of like what comes out from it. The Iraq hydrocarbon law, is it a good idea? Should we guarantee our investment
This
more?
is a mess. I have an idea of what should exist over there eventually, you know, if this war would ever end. But it is difficult to go to that ideal. I mean, I would like oil to be developed the way it was in Texas for a lot of years, and you didn't have the federal government, you didn't have anybody else, and the oil was drilled, and a lot of people became wealthy over it, and there was no abuse. But the way this is being designed, with us having the influence in writing these laws for special interests, yeah, I think they're horrible. And but there's no easy answer to that, because how do you go from the transition, from the mess we created, to turn it over to something a much fairer system? So if I can't get to the free market, which you can't under those circumstances, then you ought to make sure the powerful special interests don't benefit from this war, because they're the ones who helped encourage us to get into the war anyway.
Is it time to stand for the repeal of the Patriot Act?
Absolutely. I've done my very best on that, fought it when it came in, and we fought it in bits and pieces, and yet we thought we were making great progress, but when it came up for renewal, you know, it was more of these things: frightened, scared. If you don't vote for it, you're unpatriotic. There may be another 9/11. You'll be responsible. And they all caved in. But the American people have spoken up pretty loudly against the Patriot Act. And eventually, if we remain a republic and if we remain a free society, we would have to repeal that, because that is certainly moving in the wrong direction.
Equality of opportunity should be afforded to all Americans regardless of race, color, creed, sexual orientation, or gender identity or expression.
Yeah, and I would do all that with ignoring all those words, because that means that confuses everything. I think there's only one group that you have to worry about, only one race, and that's the human race. And the individual, every individual deserves rights because they're an individual, and not because of their race or gender or anything else. I think that really confuses things. But the main thing is you don't use any force. You can't prohibit people from doing things and denying them rights because they belong to a certain group. But because somebody belongs to a certain group, they can't force themselves on others. So I want a voluntary arrangement. There should be no force used, and no prohibitions.
Government can and must protect Americans from the threat of terrorism without eroding our constitutional liberties. Today, Arab Americans are especially vulnerable to abuses of government power. Are all citizens equal?
They should be, and that's what you should strive for. And we should have equal justice in the court. You never do. Right now, it's pretty aggravating to see that if you happen to kill somebody, but you're very, very wealthy and well known, you may well get off. Compare that to some minority in the inner city who gets caught with cocaine and never committed a violent act, or even smoking marijuana the third time. They might be put in prison for life with no chance of parole. And no violent acts. So I would say, no, there's a great deal of injustice, and that's what we should strive for.
Our security will be enhanced by working with other nations and the UN instead of acting like an empire.
Well, we shouldn't be an empire, but I don't have if I don't have much faith in my federal government because they confuse and mess things up so badly. Just think how good a job they did with Katrina and buying all those houses that got wasted. I don't like another level of government. But if we're going to have another level of government, then it should be for talking. It should be helping people who are starving. And we probably can't close down all these international agencies. But what I really object to is us going to the war under the UN. I mean, the UN has caused a great deal of trouble. There were two reasons why we went to war in Iraq. One, to go get those weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. And the other was to enforce UN resolutions. That was the legal, moral justification that Bush was using. And it started off badly. I mean, that's the way the Korean War started. We didn't follow the Constitution and say we had to declare war. We went to war because the UN told us to. And I don't like the WTO coming in and telling us what our tax code should be. So I like national sovereignty. But if you had a United Nations and you weren't going to get rid of it, to talk about trying to help some poor countries of the world and how to negotiate and get along better, that doesn't offend me nearly as much as the war-making powers of the United Nations, because I don't think they've done a very good job in keeping us out of these wars.
Ron Paul, the Progressive Litmus Test. Thank you so much for joining us, Nyan, and good luck with your presidential campaign.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
The International News Network report is broadcast television in more than 20 million homes in America. We are non-commercial, non-profit, and we are viewer-supported. That is how we can bring you these kinds of stories and interviews 5 days a week. Keep INN broadcasting. Please go to our website, INNWorldReport.net, and contribute what you can. You can also email us at INNWorldReport@gmail.com. Thank you.